welcome back, and today I'm gonna talk about my governor's map for the month of June, so let's start. And there we go. So first of all, briefly for New York, it really depends on many things. For example, let's go right here. It's a solid state for the Democrats, so Kathy Hochul is, the current governor, and it really depends on what happens if Andrew Cuomo for some reason decides to run as an independent candidate. If that does happen, then Hochul's really has big issues, and that would help Lee Zeldin, the Republican nominee that is leading at the moment. I do think that at the moment, New York governor race, it's solid Democrat, but it could easily change at any moment if Andrew Cuomo does decide to run in 2022 for some reason. Then this could weirdly become one of the most closest states in this election season. So for now, safe. And for the other states, so Texas and Florida. So Florida shouldn't be a big surprise. I think that if you look at the polls and the approval rating. So for this race, it's between Ron DeSantis, the incumbent Republican, and the Democratic Party is between Charlie Crist, which if he's the nominee, it could drop down to like 9-10% of the race for still a big win for the GOP. But if it's Nikki Fried, then it's for sure going to be a safe R win for Ron DeSantis. I think for now I'm gonna leave it as a safe race for the GOP. And yeah, so while for Texas, this is another big announcement, you could say. So I do believe this race will be quite an easy victory for the Republican Party and Abbott. I just don't see Beto O'Rourke doing well. I mean, he's going to be the nominee, of course. For the Democrats, that primary already happened. I want to look at the polls, if they are okay or not. So likely R, solid R, lean R, which some polls do miss. But let me see. Aggregate polls 538, 50%, 38%, with a lot of that undecided yet. So this race, it's kind of crazy, but at this point in this red wave midterm, alongside the economic recession that will probably happen either later this year or just right after the midterms. So whatever happens, I still see Greg Abbott winning with at least 12%, but I'm guessing he's going to win by 15% or maybe even like 16%. For Ohio, I'm just gonna say briefly for Ohio, I think Mike DeWine will easily win this race. The only way I could see something happen is if the independent candidate or the third party or whatever you could say does somehow a madness and gets a lot of the third party voters or something like that. But still, I see Mike DeWine winning here easily. And yeah, moving on for the other states. And yeah, of course, Massachusetts will go by a safe margin for the Democrats after the Republican governor, who was more of a liberal Republican, decided not to run, and it's going to be an easy win for the Democrats in this race. So for the likely races, so let's just start off for this time Illinois. So for the state of Illinois, I usually would not talk about Illinois, but because of the red wave, yeah, a lot of states are going to be quite closer. So incumbent Democrat Pritzker is going to go against someone within the Republican Party. Who knows? Maybe it's going to be Bailey or Richard Irvin, but I still see. Let's go to the polls first. I still think that this will easily be a decent win for the Democratic Party by a likely margin. I just don't think Pritzker somehow loses, even with all the money he could use in the campaign trail. And for the other states, let's go to Colorado. You know what? Yeah, let's just go to Colorado. So for the race in Colorado, as many of you know, it's the governor incumbent is Jared Polis, who's going to run for a second term. So yeah, for the Republican Party, there's not that many people. It's 80 and some people, to be honest, I don't know much about. I know some of them, but yeah, some people have, this race as solid Democrat, which it could. Out of all states, I could see Colorado being the state. As I was saying, sorry about that, I think Jared Polis should be able to win this race He could by a safe margin. I would not be surprised about that. But for now, I think it's probably gonna be like, I don't know, 9, 10 or 11%, kind of similar to Illinois, really likely state. So yeah, so for the other ones, let's just go to Kansas. Kansas. I think Kansas. This will make it harder for the incumbent Democrats, the governor Laura Kelly, to try to run for re-election, even though this is Kansas. For the Republican primary, Schmidt, Briggs, all these people are running. Not that much. I do think that the polls are saying either it's going to be a toss-up or lean R. But here's the thing: there's the undecided voters during midterms are going to vote for the opposition party, which is why I do see this race being a likely win for the GOP. It could really be anywhere from 5 to 7%, but it could really even go up to 8 or 9, who knows. For the other races, let's briefly talk about Rhode Island. So, I think Rhode Island. So for this race, it's, Dan McKee and, the Republican Party or the primary. There's not that much. I just want to look at the polls, which I do agree with will probably be a likely win for the Democrats. And yeah, for that state, that's really it. For the other races, so for my hottest take in this map, I think I'm just gonna show you which state that will be. Georgia, I just don't have a lot of hope for the Democrats in this state. I think that it's pretty bleak for them, and there's a lot of hope for the Republican Party in this state. So it's between Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican, against Stacey Abrams, who's trying to do it's going to be a rematch, of course, from 2018 as seen here, which was a rather close election during a blue wave election season. And, I'm going to go to the polls because that's really about it. Most people are saying, either toss-up, tilt, lean R, but I just don't see things going well for the Democrats. I see a lot of, the undecided voters going for Kemp. I think that, what we saw in the primary, if that turnout does in fact follow through for the Republican Party, then, I could barely see Georgia in the governor's race going by a likely margin just above that 5% threshold. Even though, in the Senate race, as many of you know, I have Herschel Walker only winning by a tilt margin. Pretty hot take for that one. So, and that's it for the likely races. So, as you can see, Republicans have 26 and the Democrats have 14 seats. For the lean states, let's talk about, first of all, I think, let's just talk about Connecticut. So, Connecticut will actually be a rematch from 2018, where during a blue wave election season, as many of you know, Ned Lamont was barely even able to win. And now in 2022, same nominees, Lamont going against Stefanowski. For the polling, as you can see, Stefanowski momentum has gotten more and more closer, which has probably scared Lamont, of course. And the issue is that the undecided voters right here are probably going to break by a decent majority to the GOP. And yeah, that's really about it. Which is why I do see this race going down, and going down to a lean margin, which who knows, it could even go by tilt, or maybe hypothetically speaking it could flip for the GOP. But for now, I think it's going to be a net Lamont win by 2 to 4% or 1 to 3%, I think. And yeah, so for the Southwest around this region, for Arizona, first of all, term limited Governor Doug Ducey cannot run, so the Republican primary, it's Kari Lake who is leading. She was endorsed by actually Donald Trump, so that's going to help her quite a lot. While for the Democrats, it's probably going to be Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State, and in the general election, it's looking like a toss-up, but here is some polls of them, and I think it's underrepresenting Kari Lake voters. And here's my prediction. So because of how bad the economy is and Biden's low approval, I just don't see the Democrats doing well in the state. And I see them, by them I mean, I see the GOP and Kari Lake winning this race by around 1 to 3%. And yeah, that's really about it. For the next state, for Wisconsin. For this race, it's between Tony Evers, And what makes this so interesting is the primary. So Cleefish was really running away with it in the primary, but then Donald Trump decided to endorse Tim Michels, who was the 2004 GOP nominee for Senate. And let's just look at the polls between Tony Evers and whoever the nominee is by the GOP. So the polling at the moment doesn't have Michels at the moment, or Michels, depends on how you say it. But most people think it's a toss-up or it's really anyone's game. But it could be Tim or Cleefish. But I don't know. I think it's going to be Cleefish. But even against the Trump endorsement, but whoever the GOP nominates, it's going to be an easy one for the GOP. I think the Republican Party wins this race by 2 to 4%. And yeah, let's talk about Nevada. So for the race in Nevada, it's going to be Sisolak, the incumbent Democrat, going against Joe Lombardo, who just got nominated since it's Wednesday the 15th here. So for the polling outside of that, let's go right here. So the polling between both of them, you can see that Lombardo has gotten a rise in the polls. But here's the thing, problem is, Democrats and Nevada always just barely win over the Republican Party. And I think that usually this would happen under normal circumstances. You would see probably Democrats barely win, but because of the economy, the high gas prices, and just the low approval rating, I do think that this time around, the Republicans and Joe Lombardo barely win here by either a tilt margin of 0.75% or a lean margin of 1.25%, and that's really about it for Nevada. So that's it for the lean states. So Republicans have 29 against Democrats 15. So I'm just gonna briefly go to Maine. This race is not that much talked about. I think that not many people really think about this race as as a big race, but it's between Jena Mills, Paul LePage, who was the former governor not that long ago, against the incumbent governor. And for the polls, that's where we're gonna care most. It's really a tight race, as you can see, Paul LePage is just right behind Jena Mills. So if things get worse in the economy, then this could easily become a Republican flip. But for now, I see Democrats holding on by a tilt margin in this race. And yeah, so let's go talk about, let's go to Oregon. I think Oregon could surprise many in this race. So it's going to be Kotek, a Democrat who's trying to succeed Kate Brown, who's not that popular, and then Christine going to be the Republican nominee, and then Betsy Johnson is going to be the independent candidate. There's no polling in Wikipedia, but let's just go. I do think that they're going to win here, but by a closer margin than anticipated. I think that the national environment and people are going to be mad at Democrats because they're the ones in power and just things are going wrong. They are actually probably going to not win by a lean margin, but probably by a tilt margin of 0.5% to 0.75%. And now for the next state, so for the state or the race in New Mexico. For the race in New Mexico, so it's going to be incumbent Grisham against Mark Ronchetti. So I say Ronchetti because that's how he pronounces. So for the polling in this race, I don't think there's much, but so it's there's a lot of undecided voters, which will help the Republicans and Ronchetti here. So what I will think will happen is that it's going to be one of the closest races in this election season, probably. Perhaps, depends on how things go. But I do think that at the end of the day, Ronchetti and the GOP will narrowly win this this governor race by a tilt margin. I think that they're going to win here by probably 0.75%. And now for the next state. So, for the race in Minnesota, with incumbent Democrat Tim Walz, I think that the Republican Party, it's basically a done deal. It's going to be Scott Jensen, a former state senator who was endorsed during the convention, so he's basically going to be the nominee. It's just formality and stuff. And his running mate, or lieutenant governor, is actually Matt Birk, who is a former football player and was in the Minnesota Vikings for over 10 years. Yeah, I think over 10 years, almost 10 years. Yeah, from 1998 to 2008. But what I think will happen is that it's going to be another tight race, but I think that the Democrats and Tim barely win this governor race by a tilt margin, and I think I'm gonna give this 0.5 win for the Democrats. And now for the races in Pennsylvania and Michigan. For the race in Pennsylvania, it's going to be Josh Shapiro, who is the Attorney General, against Doug Mastriano, a hardcore Trump guy, who is running as the Republican nominee. For the polls, let's just look if there's really any at the moment. So for the polls, the first one that came through has Josh Shapiro leading, but I think that the Republican Party, once it gets more united, will help Mastriano alongside the undecided voters. And I think that at the end of the day, Pennsylvania, in this national environment and the economy and all that sort of stuff, it will go red. I think it could be around 0.5% to 0.75%, as seen as in other states. Really close, but just going for one party. And yeah, now for the race in Michigan. So one of the most interesting ones. So especially if you're from here. So Whitmer's trying to run for re-election, while the Republican primary, it's a bunch of L's. You got James Craig. A lot of people failed to qualify or were disqualified. And then and now it's looking like if we go to the polls for the race, it's going to be Tudor Nixon. I mean Dixon, quite similar. And this will be another close race that will go down to the wire. But what I think will actually happen in the end is that Gretchen Whitmer, because of how much of a mess the Michigan GOP is and how much they've taken else recently, I see her winning here by a margin of 0.5%, and Whitmer wins re-election. And as you can see, the Republicans win with 31 seats against the Democrats' 19 seats. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video.